Good morning, everyone. Hello, hello. Nice group we have here in this post-COVID world. I love it. My name is Mike Mcmullen. I'm president of the Carroll County Chamber of Commerce. We've been around almost 100 years. In 1924 is when we first started out, so a couple of years from now it'll be 100 years. I've been here for 12 of them, so I can't talk about the past, but I can say currently now our main focus is building relationships. So before you leave here today, even on the way out, see someone that you don't really know, shake a hand, exchange a business card. So you're all here to hear from Aniban. It's going to be great. Just by a show of hands, how many people have never heard him speak? Okay, not that many, but you guys who haven't are in for a real treat, and the ones who have are in for a treat as well. So I want to introduce to you the chair of our board, who's going to act as your MC of the day. How about a nice round of applause for Val Giovignoni of Ting? Yeah, Val.
Good morning. I'm Val, and I am a project manager at Ting Internet. And for those of you who may not know, Ting is a national fiber internet company. Thank you. They probably can't see me, right? Serving the city of Westminster here locally. And we are delighted to be a part of the community. I am honored to serve as the chair of the board this year. But honestly, on the list of my favorite things today is the fact that I see so many beautiful faces in one room. Like, does this not feel amazing? It feels like we're back to reality, right? I cannot go on without giving you the please request from Mr. Mcmullen. Please check your cell phone. Let's make sure that your cell phones are silenced. You might want to check my purse, Mike. No, I'm teasing. I just did it. I'd really like to thank the Community Media Center who are filming this presentation. They worked really hard to get this going this morning. They were here late last night and early this morning, and so we're super appreciative to them. It will rebroadcast on Comcast High Definition 1086, Channel 19, YouTube, and their Facebook page. So if you know anybody who wasn't able to be here this morning, make sure you let them know that it will be available async. I would now like to recognize the elected officials and distinguished persons who we have here with us today. I will start with the Carroll County Commissioners. We have Ed Rothstein, Dick Weaver, Dennis Frazier, and Eric Boucher. Thank you for being here. We have two members of the Carroll County Board of Education, Kenneth Kyler, President of the board, and Marcia Herbert. Thank you for being here. We also have Tony Cavacci, Westminster City Councilman, with us. Thank you, Tony. We have with us Nan Mann, representative of Chris Van Hollen. Thank you. Tawny Town Councilwoman Diane Foster is here today. Thank you, Diane. And we also have Dr. Jim Ball, president of Carroll Community College. I saw him this morning. I also would love to recognize past chairs of the Chamber's board. We have immediate past chair Steve Aquino of Aquino Financial Group. We'll go through the list first. Wayne Barnes of R. Wayne Barnes Life and Long-Term Care, Dave Bollinger of Barnes Bollinger Insurance, Steve Wance of Carroll Community College, and Lori Blake of Fuchs. Thank you to each of you. Oh, she's literally right here, and Suzette Koval of Farmers and Merchants Bank. Will members of the current Chamber Board of Directors please stand and be recognized so everyone can see who their Chamber Board is? A super awesome group of people that I truly enjoy working with. Before I flip the page, have I missed introductions of anyone? Any elected officials? Sweet. Okay. Once a year, the Chamber's annual meeting At the Chamber's annual meeting, our members elect 6 directors for 3-year terms that begin the following January 1st. 4 of the current directors, whose terms expire on December 31st, are eligible to serve second terms if elected, and they have agreed to do so. Thank you to Andrea Bursler, Executive Director of the Carroll County Library System, Colleen Kramer-Beal of Velinoski Wealth Management, Jim McCarron of Mutual of Omaha Insurance, and John Allen of Advantage Internet Marketing for agreeing to serve second terms. On behalf of the Chamber members, the Board of Directors, and the Chamber staff, I would like to say a special word of thanks to the following people who are finishing their second consecutive 3-year terms at the end of this year. Thank you so much to Lisa Diggets of Carroll Occupational Health and Sharon McLaren of Carroll Hospital. To fill these 2 vacancies, the Chamber's Executive Committee, with approval of the Board of Directors, has nominated the following 2 individuals: Dr. James Ball, President of Carroll Community College, and Mr. Seth Shipley, owner of Shipley's Diamonds and Fine Jewelry in Hampstead. The Chamber's board therefore recommends that the membership elect the following 6 individuals to 3-year terms beginning January 1st, 2023. Andrea Bursler, Colleen Kramer-Beal, Jim McCarron, John Allen, Dr. James Ball, and Seth Shipley. Please let me remind you that during this portion of our event today, only 1 representative of each member organization present may vote or otherwise act as a voice of a Chamber member. To get the business of the meeting on the floor for consideration, can I have a motion to approve the election of the slate of directors recommended by the board? Thank you, Richard. Is there a second to this motion? My guys, I can always count on them. Thank you. Now, is there any discussion on this motion, or are there any additional nominations from the floor? Sure you're ready to come back, Dr. Ball? There being no additional nominations, we will move to a vote on the slate recommended by the board. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Sweet. The motion is approved. Congratulations to the directors elected or re-elected. Okay, it's sponsor time. We have multiple sponsors for today's meeting. Please allow me to introduce these sponsors. The Chamber's media sponsor is the media sponsor for so many events, the Community Media Center. Please stand and be recognized, Mr. Turner. And of course, what would Richard say? Watch local. Our silver sponsor, New Windsor State Bank. Our NWSB Bank, I'm sorry, old habits die hard. That is so terrible. Let me start over. Our silver sponsor, NWSB Bank. Please stand and be recognized. Thank you. There we go. Our gold level sponsors are invited to come forward and make a brief comment. So I will start with Joe Tabling from CQI Associates, the Chamber's Energy Co-op partner, Senior Associate Joe Tabling.
Well, good morning, everybody. Yes, it does feel great to have everybody in one room again. We are so happy to be a sponsor of this event. For the last, believe it or not, 15 years, we have been providing the Energy Co-op benefit to all the members. Over that time, we've saved, I think the last time we looked at it was over $2 million for the members as far as lowering rates. What I can tell you is that we're very happy to be here. This has been a favorite chamber of mine for years. Mike and the staff have been absolutely amazing. The members here have been absolutely amazing through all the years. What you're going to hear today is some incredible information, and I think for the folks that are not working with us at the moment, after you hear what you're going to hear, you may want to stop by and see us. So, thanks again.
We have some foreshadowing. He's also a fortune teller. From Aquino Financial Group, LLC, owner and founder, Steve Aquino.
Thanks, Val, and good morning. Again, I'm Steve Aquino, president of Aquino Financial Group, an independent wealth management firm here in Westminster. And I was also proud to serve as 2 terms, actually, as past chair of the Chamber of Commerce. And it's a great opportunity to be up here as a sponsor today. Obviously, everything that's going on in the world, Anibon always brings great information and insight of what's going on in the financial world. And now more than ever, it's a perfect opportunity to get his insight and thoughts, and I'm sure probably laugh a little bit or cry, depending on what he's gonna actually go over today. As a registered investment advisor, we have served as fiduciaries for both our clients, for families and businesses for over 25 years now. And as a wealth manager, obviously we've been getting a lot of questions what's going on in the world. And what we try to do is to educate and help our clients meet their financial dreams and goals. So basically, if you have any questions or anything like that of what's going on, please always feel free to contact me. Obviously, all my information's out there. I'll be more than happy to sit down and go over your specific situation and answer whatever questions that you may have. Thank you again.
Thank you, Steve. From Fuchs North America, Inc., VP of Sales and Technical, Ken Woostenfeld. Did I totally butcher that?
No, that was very close. Very
Okay.
close. Thank you. Well, as the previous speakers mentioned, that we're very proud to be here this morning to be a sponsor of this event. I was talking to Lori, and we've been part of the chamber for 14 years, so that's exciting for us as Fuchs. So if you don't know us, we're that big 215,000 square foot building on Hampstead, Mexico Road. And we do custom seasoning blends and spices. So some of the, we're the North America headquarters. Our global headquarters is actually out of Dissen, Germany. So we have facilities all around the globe. Some fun facts on the seasoning side is we sell a seasoning blend to Domino's that goes in all their pizza sauce. Utz, a huge customer of ours, so anything for sour cream and onion, barbecue seasonings, those are all made in that facility in Hampstead. So Pringles, General Mills. So we deal with all the big CPG companies as well as restaurant chains. So proud to be here and looking forward to the rest of the calendar here. Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion that we make it mandatory that there's a PM Connections in your test kitchen. And finally, from Carroll County Public Library, Community Manager Lisa Picker and Community Engagement Manager Katie Townsley.
Good morning, I'm Lisa Picker, and this is Katie Townsley. On behalf of Carroll County Public Library, we are delighted to be a sponsor of today's event. Our library plays a vital role in offering workforce development and entrepreneurship opportunities to our community. And with the addition of Exploration Commons at 50 East, we are setting the stage for a new model of library service across the nation. We want to thank our community for being so invested in our libraries to make us such a star across the nation, really, in library service.
We believe in not only welcoming all, but also building spaces where our community can thrive and be celebrated. Which brings me to the library's newest celebration in our community, which is called the Lighted Carroll Awards. On your table, you all will see that we are thrilled to have received 38 nominations in our inaugural year. These are 38 individuals and organizations that deserve to be recognized for the outstanding work that they're doing in our community each and every day. So we would love for you to join us for our awards presentation and breakfast on Thursday, November the 10th at 8 a.m. Ticket sales are now open, or you can talk to me later about that.
And we will be recognizing folks in the following categories: Organization Award for not only nonprofit, but also businesses, Youth and Individual Award, Educator, School Librarian, Technology, Cultural Awareness, Health, and the Arts. Yes, this is a shameless plug, but we need your support to make our event a success. So thank you all.
The last thing is that we're delighted to announce the nominees hot off the press. Come on, I mean, we have to take our time with this one. So on the sheet, we are announcing them today for the first time. They're on our website and also on the sheet. So please come out and celebrate these extraordinary individuals in our community.
Thank you, ladies. So now we're moving on to our keynote speaker, Mr. Anirban Basu. Anirban Basu is the chairman and CEO of Sage Policy Group, Inc. Anirban is a study in contradictions. He has been called an economist with a personality, or alternatively, one with a sense of humor. He has twice been recognized as one of Maryland's 50 most influential people. He has also been named one of Baltimore's region's 20 most powerful business leaders. In 2014, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan appointed Dr. Basu as chairman of the Maryland Economic Development Commission. He teaches global strategy at Johns Hopkins University and serves as the chief economist function for a number of organizations around the country. Please welcome Mr. Anirban Basu.
Right now, can you hear me? Can you hear me in the back? Yes? Oh, sure, fantastic. Okay, great. Well, now we get a chance to talk about the economy, of course. I want to welcome the folks from Gerstel Academy, of course. First and foremost, speaking to young people is a great honor. And not that everyone's not young, of course, but they're particularly young, as it turns out. So a lot of places I could begin a presentation like this. I could talk about Russia and Ukraine, of course. I could talk about recent economic lockdowns in China. I could talk about the recent decision by the OPEC Plus nations to truncate oil supply by 2 million barrels per day. Yesterday, oil prices in North America rose by about $6 a barrel. Lots of places where I could begin. But let me begin first with the theme of this year's presentation, James Bond. My presentation this year is entitled No Time to Buy. And why is it no time to buy? Well, because, of course, of the specter of inflation. And that is the most salient characteristic of U.S. economic activity presently. It is this elevated inflation, which shapes not just our current lifestyles, but also very much shapes the economic outlook for the next year. And we'll talk about that. By the way, I will leave some time at the end for questions and answers, so please think about what questions you'd like to ask me as I go through these materials. And so I must tell you that this bout of enduring inflation has come as a surprise to many folks. Somewhere out there in America, there's probably a millennial who at least pre-pandemic would have said to you, why do we even measure inflation? Why do we do it? It's always 2%. We don't need to measure inflation. But of course, those of us who grew up in the 1970s into the early 1980s know that it need not be 2%. It certainly has not been 2% recently. This is your consumer price index, 2 lines here. The line, that is the darker blue colored line, that is your all items consumer price index. Overall inflation over the past 12 months, and this is 12-month percent change, and much of the data I will show you today are time series data. So the more contemporary data are to the right of the slide. But overall inflation in our society running at 8.3% year over year. That's a reasonable departure from 2%. Now the lighter blue colored line, the one that ends at the bottom, that's your so-called core consumer price index, all items minus food and energy. We economists occasionally like to subtract out food and energy prices from such computations because food and energy prices are notoriously volatile, but also because they are susceptible to non-economic influence like Vladimir Putin, as it turns out, but also natural disaster and weather. That is running on a year-over-year basis at 6.3% once you take out gasoline and food prices, still 6.3% inflation. But note, if you look toward the right of the slide, the very end of that data series, you'll notice that core inflation actually ticked up during the most recent month, which we have data. On the Tuesday that number came out, the Dow Jones fell more than 1,200 points. The markets do not like inflation, and you will not like your third quarter portfolio statement. You will not enjoy that. That is an envelope you probably should recycle. Do not open that envelope. It will not make you happy. But again, a lot of this has to do with inflation. And as I say, this comes as a surprise to many folks because for 4 decades we had benign inflationary numbers, but no longer. And I think some economists should have known much better. Economists who actually influence these outcomes, inflationary outcomes and economic outcomes more broadly, because they actually shape monetary policy in our country. I speak, of course, of the folks at the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States of America, the folks who at their Federal Open Market Committee meetings determine optimal levels for short-term interest rates, determine the optimal size of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. This bout of inflation begins to manifest itself during the spring of 2021. That's when we start to notice some hot inflation numbers. By the summer of 2021, the summer of last year, inflation is running at 6% year over year. Here are some statements that came out of Federal Reserve meetings, Federal Open Market Committee meetings around that time, the spring of 2021. So if you look toward the northwest corner of the slide, if you can see the text, and if you can't, that's fine, I'm going to read it. The statement coming out of that June 2021 meeting was, quote, inflation has risen, largely reflecting transitory factors. Now, a synonym for the word transitory is fleeting. The notion is highly temporary. So the notion at this point is, yes, we at the Federal Reserve are aware that America has an inflation problem, but don't you worry about it. It is fleeting, it is temporary. And by the way, we at the Federal Reserve don't have to do anything about this. This is going to go away on its own. This is simply the reopening of the economy from the pandemic. This is some supply chain disruptions. That's creating this inflationary situation. Don't you worry about it. We have this firmly under control. By July, the statement is, quote, inflation has risen, largely reflecting transitory factors. So yes, another month has passed. We're stretching the meaning of the word transitory perhaps, but don't worry about it. This is completely under control. So please, America, stop sending us your emails. Stop making nasty TikToks about us. Your Federal Reserve is on top of this situation. Now, by September, the statement is, quote, inflation is elevated, largely reflecting transitory factors. So your central bank took the time to change the word risen to elevated, because that matters so much. So it rose during the spring of 2021, stays elevated into the fall, but the key word, of course, is still transitory. By November, the statement is inflation is elevated, largely reflecting factors that are expected to be transitory. And for the first time, they are recognizing we might be wrong. That inflation may have become ingrained into the US economy, in particular into inflation expectations. If you're a restaurateur setting menu prices, no longer do you believe that inflation is going to run at 2%, so you're going to set that expectation into your menu prices. If you're a labor union negotiator, you no longer think inflation is going to be 2%, you set that expectation into your negotiations. In other words, expectations become, to a certain extent at least, self-fulfilling prophecies. And by December, the statement is completely transfigured. Quote, supply and demand imbalances related to the pandemic and the reopening of the economy have continued to contribute to elevated levels of inflation. The word transitory is dead, gone, and buried. But not only have they pivoted in terms of their language by this point, they've pivoted in terms of their policymaking. Now all of a sudden they realize we have to do something about this. We're going to have to raise interest rates. We're going to tighten monetary policy. Now around this time, December of 2021, a conventional wisdom among Wall Street economists was that the Federal Reserve might have to raise rates 3 times in terms of quarter-point equivalents in 2022. The first economist of note who I heard suggested might be 4 times is a guy named Jan Hatzius. Jan Hatzius is the chief economist at Goldman Sachs. And he says in December of 2021, I think it would be 4 times in terms of quarter-point equivalents. Now, he works for Goldman Sachs, so his house is bigger than mine, but he does not drive a Mustang. In any case, the conventional wisdom now is that the Federal Reserve, in terms of quarter-point equivalents, will raise rates 17 times, roughly, in 2022. Already 12 of that has occurred. So the quarter-point increase in March, 0.25%, then a 0.5% increase a couple months after that, then 0.75% June, July, September. So that gets you up to 12 quarter-point rate increases, more to come later this year during the November and December meetings. Now, a separate statement comes out from our Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, that month after that December FOMC meeting, and he says, quote, these problems have been larger and longer lasting than anticipated, meaning we were surprised. We're telling the American people for the better part of a year, transitory. We were wrong. Exacerbated by waves of the virus, not our fault. This is Delta, this is Omicron. We're not genetic epidemiologists or virologists, we're simply monetary policymakers, and we missed it. As a result, overall inflation is running well above our 2% long-run goal and will likely to do so well into next year. Well, they actually got that right. Inflation has been above 2% in 2022. Now, again, I think these economists should have known better because they actually influence inflationary outcomes, in particular by shaping money supply. Here, a graph back to 1959. And you can see how profound the growth in money supply has been over the course of the pandemic. You can also see more recently, if you look again toward the very end of the data series, just the brakes have been put on. Money supply is no longer growing as they desperately try to take back what they have given. So there's a foundational equation in monetary economics known as the quantity equation, also known as the equation of exchange. I like to call it the equation of exchange because that's just downright sexier. That equation says that when you increase money supply, 2 things can happen. Either economic growth accelerates, which of course is the objective, to try to countervail the worst effects of the pandemic on the economy, and or 2, Price growth, meaning inflation accelerates. But here's the thing. As they were increasing money supply, what do we know was happening? Of course, Chamber of Commerce members would know this better than anybody else. You're in business, and thanks to Carroll County Chamber of Commerce for inviting me. It's a privilege. We had supply chain disruptions, lack of workers, lack of truck drivers, lack of port handling capacity in Los Angeles, Savannah, Georgia, global, interruptions, in terms of, physical lockdowns in China and other parts of the world. So as they were increasing money supply, output could only grow so rapidly. So what had taken much of the burden of equilibrating that equation? Price growth. So the same people who've been telling you it's merely transitory are the same people who basically guaranteed it would not be. Now, that said, I'm not suggesting to anyone in this audience that the only reason we've had this bout of enduring inflation is because of money supply or monetary policy generally. There have been other issues. This comes from the US Census Bureau's Small Business Pulse survey. Question on the table is, over the past week, has your business had any of the following? Red colored line, domestic supplier delays. Now, these data only go through April as the Census Bureau is retooling the survey. But what it says is that week, 45% of our small businesses reported some domestic supplier delay. But notice for many months, nothing changes about that. The supply chain doesn't improve. You and I have been growing up in this world of just-in-time inventory. If you wanted it, sir, it would be there for you just in time. But the supply chain is now broken for various reasons. And again, Russia's assault on Ukrainian democracy and Chinese economic lockdowns don't help any of this, as China is home to a quarter of global manufacturing. The blue line there represents foreign supplier delays. Same story. And of course, if the supply side of the economy can't function properly, there is scarcity. And when there is scarcity, there's competition over scarce goods, and that is inflationary. Indeed, the sheer nature of the economic expansion to date has been a source of inflation. This is quarterly gross domestic product growth back to 1990. Some unfortunate added complexity on this slide, two vertical axes. The blue color bars are indexed to the left-hand vertical axis, the red color bar to the right. The red color bars to the right. Now, you'll notice the numbers on the right-hand vertical axis are much larger to accommodate the volatility of the economy over the course of the pandemic. Now, reading from left to right, the last blue colored bar here is the fourth quarter of 2019. It's the last quarter before we shut down the economy. It is a quarter of economic growth. We entered 2020 with meaningful momentum. We added jobs in January of 2020, 376,000 jobs in February of 2020, a perfectly respectable tally. Shut down the economy in March of 2020. Now, March of 2020, of course, is embodied by the first quarter of 2020, here represented by the first red-colored bar, reading from left to right. And during that quarter, the U.S. economy shrinks 5% on an annualized basis. And ladies and gentlemen, that's a headliner by itself. For instance, during the fourth quarter of 2008, which had been the worst quarter of our economic lives, the U.S. economy shrinks 8.4% on an annualized basis. So a negative 5% print is a big deal. Unfortunately, this time around, it is merely the appetizer. For during the second quarter of 2020, the U.S. economy shrinks 31.4% on an annualized basis. That's that red bar that you see slumping to the south of the slide. And around this time, a furious debate breaks out in the economics community. What would the initial phase of recovery look like? Would it be U-shaped, L-shaped, Nike swoosh, check mark, square root, hockey stick? It was a straight up V. For during the third quarter of 2020, the U.S. economy races back, growing 33.4% on an annualized basis. At no point has the supply side of the economy been able to handle that level of growth. You might notice that during several ensuing quarters, economic growth running in the high single digits on an annualized basis in a country accustomed to growing 1.5% to 3% a year. At, again, no point has the supply side of the economy been able to handle that kind of demand growth. That's inflationary. Admittedly, during the first two quarters of 2022, circumstances changed. Economic growth turned negative in real terms for a variety of reasons. And of course, that satisfies the technical definition of recession. I'm going to make the case that we have not been in recession, but set that aside, the point is, for much of this period, economic growth has been robust, and the supply side has really struggled to keep up. Now, we've talked about a number of factors explaining this enduring bout of inflation. We've talked about money supply and monetary policy. We've talked about supply chain disruptions. We've talked about the nature of the economic recovery, this V-shaped recovery. In fact, by the second quarter of last year, American gross domestic product was above its pre-pandemic level. That's how quickly we recovered. But to more completely explain why inflation has endured and why it will continue to, we need to talk about at least one other factor. And that factor pertains to the behavior or dynamics of the US labor market. Let's turn to that now. And one of the things that we get from the government every month are data regarding the number of available unfilled jobs in America. We just got the data a couple of days ago from the JOLT survey, the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey, which indicates that as of August, we're home to around 10.1 million available unfilled jobs. And you'll notice that the number of job openings has been falling. But it is still the case that as of the previous month, we had about 2 job openings for every unemployed American. Make no mistake, whether you're young or not so young, America is still very much the land of opportunity. If you're looking for a job in America, there is one waiting for you. Oh, no, I'm sorry, there are 2. Now, because the number of job openings fell, it suggested that the economy is slowing down, and the stock market rallied on that data. So we're now in a period during which bad news is good news, and vice versa, and vice versa. You know, yesterday the markets did not fare quite as well because we got bad news on inflation. OPEC Plus decided to truncate its quotas by 2 million barrels per day, and so oil prices rose. That's not good in terms of the inflation fight. But so what we're praying for, in some sense, is for the economy to fall apart, if you can believe that. But that's really what the market's looking for, because if that happens, of course, inflation becomes more benign. It is still the case, however, that even at 10 million job openings, that's a lot of unfilled jobs. If you look at the pre-pandemic level, when the economy was very strong, by the way, we had a 50-year low in unemployment, we had about 7 million job openings. So they got a ton of unfilled jobs out there. And one of the reasons for this scarcity of talent is because the labor force is much smaller today than it would have been but for the pandemic. I can say that in many different ways, but I'm going to use percentages. This is your US labor force participation rate graphed back to 1950. This represents the proportion of working age adults, or working age people, who are either working or looking for work, but they're engaged. Now, as an aside, you note, please, how rapidly labor force participation grows from the late 1960s through the 70s and 80s as women join the labor market en masse. This is broadly when America shifts from becoming about single-income households to dual-income households. Some of you might remember the very popular television show 30-something from the late 1980s. This is a show about dual-income families operating in the Philadelphia suburbs around that time. Because they were so focused on their careers, they didn't have enough time for each other, didn't have enough time to pick up dry cleaning. It was not a very deep show, but featured a very attractive cast, along with actor Timothy Busfield. Now, this pattern of rising labor force participation ends roughly with the turn of the century. Since that time, labor force participation has broadly been declining. Baby boomers have been retiring in larger numbers, of course, but also young American men are not nearly as engaged in the labor market as they once were. And what they're up to, no one knows. But that's one of the things that we see in the data. Now, that said, before the pandemic, the economy is very strong, 50-year low in unemployment, and so we see labor force participation edging higher during that period. At pandemic eve, the labor force participation rate is at 63.4%. It then falls or collapses to 60.2% as 8 million people leave the labor force. It has since bounced back to 62.4%, but still well short of what it was. So labor force is not as large as it used to be. Very rapid recovery, lots of job openings, and so there's a mismatch, and so that's problematic from an inflationary perspective. More on this in a moment. But something else has happened here. What people want out of the world of work has also changed over the course of the pandemic. Good Hire is a background check company out of Redwood City, California. They recently conducted a survey of 3,500 Americans. If you look toward the northwest of the slide, what it says is that 68% of Americans would choose remote work options over in-office or at the job site work. People prefer to work remotely. They prefer it. Computer, cat, coffee, that is all they need. They don't want to commute. They don't want to be with their colleagues. They do not like their colleagues. A separate survey finds that 57% of Americans find their colleagues to be annoying because they overshare, meaning they get too personal. They take credit for another's work, and of course the biggie, they interrupt during conversations, which of course can happen during Zoom meetings and typically does. Nonetheless, there's this preference for remote work. If you look at the third bullet on the left-hand side, it says 74% of Americans believe that companies not offering remote working arrangements will lose major talent in the workforce. Of course, 100% of the people answering that question view themselves as major talent, but the point is there is this, not just this desire to work remotely, but an expectation now that employers will offer that opportunity at least occasionally. And so how do employers deal with this scarcity and this new world of the workforce? Well, of course, they pay more. This is the employment cost index, 12% change. The line at the very top there, the darker blue-colored line, that's your wage and salary growth. And you can see how profound it has been over the course of the pandemic. The lighter blue-colored line there at the very bottom, that's your benefit cost growth. And so we've seen a lot of inflation in that category because employers are trying to better tailor their compensation packages to what it is their employees actually want to better retain them at this time of the Great Resignation. 4.2 million people quit their jobs during the most recent month for which we have data, for instance, and we've seen that all year round. And actually, that's the fastest path people have discovered to significant pay increases. Quit your job and get another one, because somebody's willing to pay you more. And even this is misleading, that lower blue-colored line, as much inflation as that reflects. And why is that? Well, it's not all-encompassing. There are certain benefits that employers can offer employees that would not show up on a chart like this. I will give you an example. I operate an economic consultancy out of downtown Baltimore, Maryland. I have 12 employees, including myself. We also lease 2,400 square feet of office space in downtown Baltimore. Recently, I said to my staff, and my staff is mostly millennial economists and analysts, they're 30-somethings. So I said to them, I think we should go back to the office. And I said, not every day, I understand the world has changed, but Tuesdays and Thursdays, I think we should get together, talk about the client experience, try to innovate, just be together, talk through various issues, and also I'm paying rent, and I need to justify that, so I'm in a lease. So, and they said to me, and again, these are millennials, they said to me, boss, because they don't call me Anibon because I'm not sure they know my name, but they said, boss, that's a very kind offer, it's not going to happen. Now, they're millennials, so they actually communicate in that way. They simply didn't show up. But the point is that I'm offering our staff the opportunity to work remotely, but it would not show up on a slide like this. Why? Because there's no transaction there. There's no monetization. So, in fact, employee costs have actually risen much more rapidly than this would suggest. So what I'm trying to say, the red line there, the sandwich line, is overall compensation increase, but that's inflationary. And, many of these employees, let's say, average hourly earnings are up 5.2% over the past year. Well, thank you for that 5 or 6% raise. That, normally I'd be very thankful, as it turns out, but inflation is 8.3%. So I'm falling behind. Food is rising by more than 10% a year. I'm falling behind. You need to pay me more. And we've got 10 million job openings. Often the temptation is to pay more. That's inflationary. Nonetheless, despite higher costs and actually falling worker productivity this year, employers have been hiring aggressively. This is monthly job growth back to May of 2020 when the recovery in the economy began. The last month here is August of 2022, a month during which America adds 315,000 jobs. Now, we'll get a jobs report tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That number is going to be revised. We'll get another number this time for September. But the point is, you can see how consistent job growth has been. And so because we added 315,000 jobs in August, America is now fully recovered in terms of total jobs supported. If you were to compare February of 2020 national employment, the month before we shut down the economy, to August of 2022, which is the last month for which we have data, if you look at the blue-colored bar there, we're up 240,000 jobs. We've now recovered. These other horizontal bars represent for each of these industries the number of jobs added or subtracted by segment. So at the very bottom, the worst performer is leisure and hospitality. That's your restaurant and hotel worker by and large. And restaurants and hotels have had a devil of a time recruiting workers, in part because other industries like fulfillment centers or distribution centers have been offering higher pay, luring some of those workers away. If you look at the top of the slide, the industries that have added the most jobs, professional business services. Now, why is that? Well, number one, it's a pretty large part of the economy. These are largely white-collar jobs. It includes your attorneys, your accountants, so on and so forth, for the most part. But also, disproportionately, because these are white-collar jobs, these employers offer the opportunity for people to work remotely. And of course, many people looking for work are looking for that kind of opportunity, and so they end up categorized in that segment. Beneath that, a segment that is critical to Carroll County's economy or economic performance, trade, transportation, utilities, that's your supply chain. That's your fulfillment center worker. That's your truck driver. And of course, if you ask folks around here, where is the commercial growth? Where is the business growth in Carroll County? The first word that'll probably come out of their mouth is industrial. That's the supply side of the economy, manufacturing and distribution. It's been critical to growing the commercial tax base of this county, and will continue to because this is a centrally located county with incredible assets. So in any case, that's why that segment of the economy has added so many jobs. Maryland has not been a strong performer. Has not been a strong performer. And somebody asked me yesterday during a presentation, why is Maryland such an underperformer? And I was thinking, well, it's, part of it is taxes and part of it's regulation, whether, Maryland Department of the Environment or Department of Natural Resources, whatever. The environment's very important, don't get me wrong, but some of those decisions can be, take a long time and also can be pretty uncertain for people investing in our state. I think the number 1 and 2 reasons that this state is underperforming economically is Montgomery County and Baltimore City. I mean, Baltimore City, of course, is our only large city, and it is a vast underperformer. I was in Portsmouth, New Hampshire recently, and people were telling me how great Boston is and how awful Baltimore is. Though they've not been to Baltimore, they just have heard, So, but that reputational effect really constrains us. A lot of young people, millennials, want to live in cities. And, given that Baltimore is so much less expensive than Washington, D.C. or Philadelphia, certainly New York, you would think that we'd be attracting young people like crazy, but of course we've got these public safety issues there. So the city's population is not growing, it's shrinking. And then Montgomery County, my goodness, the business climate there is so challenging. And then if I can just go across the river and move to Fairfax County or to Arlington or something like that, I'm going to do that. And so that's where I see the underperformance. There are other factors at work as well, but our state, if you look at the data, has not recovered in terms of jobs. We've lost not quite 50,000 jobs over the course of the pandemic. Our unemployment rate is meaningfully above the national average, when it should not be. Why shouldn't it be? Because we're more educated than the balance of the country. We are more affluent than the rest of the country. We are better looking than the balance of the country. And if you like been to neighboring states, you know what I'm talking about. And so it's just obvious, right? You cross that Pennsylvania line. Oh my God, who are these people? Are they people? Are they people? Now, let me show you some more regional economic data. So this is employment growth for the 25 largest metropolitan areas in America in percentage terms, February 2020 versus August of 2022. Not really a properly titled slide in some sense, because not every region has generated employment growth over the course of the pandemic, but many have. At number 1, Dallas, Texas. Now, Dallas, for the most recent year for which we have Census Bureau data, added more people than any other region of the country. It has been booming for years, North Texas. The governor of Texas, a guy named Greg Abbott, much in the news recently for various reasons. Greg Abbott, one of his governors, very aggressive in keeping his state's economy as open as possible, even during the worst of the pandemic, trying to retain as much economic momentum as possible. This could also be said for, at number 4, is Atlanta, Georgia. That's Governor Brian Kemp of Georgia. Again, one of these governors very aggressive in keeping his state's economy open. Governor Kemp was the first governor in the country now running for re-election, as it turns out. He was the first governor in the country to reopen his state's economy. It happened on April 20th of 2020. Number 5 is Tampa. That's Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida. Again, Ron DeSantis, one of these guys, very aggressive in keeping his state's economy open, likely presidential candidate 2024. If you've ever met Governor Ron DeSantis, probably best if you're not wearing a mask. He does not like it. I'm told his worst day of the year by his staff, his worst day of the year, Halloween. And then number 6, Phoenix, that's Governor Doug Ducey of Arizona. Again, Doug Ducey, one of these guys, very aggressive in keeping the state's economy open, particularly with respect to neighbors like New Mexico and California, which were heavily shut down. So some governors were focused on that, keeping economies open, trying to retain as much economic momentum as possible. Other governors much more fixated on the public health implications of COVID-19. At number 24, San Francisco Metro, negative 1.7%. And at 25 is Los Angeles, negative 2.3%. Who's the governor of California? Why, it's the wickedly handsome Gavin Newsom, himself could be a Hollywood actor, likely presidential candidate 2024. Of course, he says he's not going to run for president in 2024. No chance, he says, but based on his record, that means he's going to run in 2024. And so he was the last governor of the country to reopen his economy. So, and Andrew Cuomo, New York, and so on and so forth, pretty aggressive. Charlie Baker, Massachusetts. So some governors were focused on that. I'm not saying which approach is better or not. That's for you to decide. I'm simply saying that such things have economic consequences, except you might ask me the question, why? I mean, many of the big decisions made about economic lockdowns were in 2020. We're now in the latter stages of 2022. So Anirban, why does this possibly matter? And to explain my perspective on these things, I will turn now to the parable of Humpty Dumpty. So Humpty Dumpty, according to contemporary lore, is an egg. According to ancient lore, a siege cannon, as it turns out. But according to contemporary lore, an egg. But an egg with special characteristics: arms, legs, a face. Now, one day Humpty Dumpty is sitting on a wall, minding his own business, public property, by the way, no trespass. And somebody comes up behind Humpty Dumpty, probably Vladimir Putin, and pushes him off that wall. Now, he's an egg, so he breaks, he cracks. That's what eggs do. And so all the king's horses and all the king's men come rushing to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Now, I'm not sure the horses are there. They've got no hands. So they can only make matters much, much worse if you can visualize this. Next time take an Uber. But even the men could not do it. And my point is, the economy is akin to an egg. We broke it, with good reason, but we broke it. But it was less shattered in certain communities like Tampa, Atlanta, Phoenix, Dallas than in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco. And it's been hard to reconstitute that egg in the economy given these supply chain issues and given these labor force dynamics. And so you can see some of the results of, still in the data with respect to the intensity of economic lockdowns. On this next slide, same 25 major metropolitan areas, but instead of employment growth in percentage terms, this is unemployment rates. And here, ladies and gentlemen, is the problem. These unemployment rates are too low. And you say, that is crazy talk. We're happy the chamber invited you, but I don't think we should invite you back because we like low rates of unemployment. Yes, generally we do, but not when we've got 10.1 million jobs to fill and not when we're worried about inflation. You look at Minneapolis here, which is at a perfectly horrific pandemic. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look up Minneapolis 2020. It'll come right up. Their labor force has shrunk, and partially as a consequence, they can't find workers. Unemployment rate is down at 2.1%. Miami and Tampa have fared better, but under 3% unemployment. How do you grow an economy where there's almost no one left to hire? And the Federal Reserve looks at these data and says, we have to break this. When Jerome Powell says, our Federal Reserve chairman, we have to cause pain for the American people, they're going to feel some pain. That's what he's talking about, shattering this equilibrium. Tearing this down so that unemployment starts to really take off. And I think if you went into the halls of the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C., some of those economists would tell you, in a moment of honesty, if they would do that, we don't think we can engineer a soft landing. What does that mean? Slow down the economy, weed out excess inflation, and not drive us into recession. We think we need a recession to get back down to 2% inflation. Now, what about this state? Maryland unemployment rates, Carroll County down to 3.6%. Yes, our statewide unemployment rate is higher than the national average, but Carroll County, 3.6%. And many jurisdictions now with less than 4% unemployment. How do you grow the economy when it's that low? This is Carroll County unemployment over time, back to 2002, the unemployment rate. It rose during the summer months, but that tends to happen as high schoolers and others join the labor market to take on seasonal employment, but it still continues to be quite low. In fact, it's right about at the national average. This is employment by place of residence. And this is what this says, a complicated slide. But of course, there's jobs by place of work, jobs in Westminster, or Finksburg, or Hampstead, or wherever it happens to be. But there's also jobs by place of residence. This slide represents the number of people who live in Carroll County with a job. Now, over the past year, that's grown, as it turns out, but there are still more than 30, that population of people with a job has shrunk by more than 3,000 people over the course of the pandemic. We're not back yet. And a lot of those folks will not come back to the labor market because they're baby boomers. They've retired. They're done. Now, some baby boomers are coming back to the labor market that had retired. There's something called the unretirement rate. And of course, with such high inflation, no surprise, some people are unretiring, if only drive Ubers and Lyfts. But the point is, this also reflects the fact that the labor force has shrunk in Carroll County, and that's important to think about with respect to, obviously, small business vitality generally, but also the housing stock here, and what that means for the optimal pace of residential development to try to attract the next generation of workers. Obviously, a very difficult issue. And I know that many people here would say, look, we need a workforce in Carroll County, but let them live in Baltimore County. And I get that. Nonetheless, there's an issue there that really does raise some of these issues. All right, enough of that. Let me talk about something else now. Let me talk about real estate and construction. So I started off this discussion by talking about interest rates in the Federal Reserve. It's a good place to start. Actually, it's where I'm going to end in a few moments. Let me show you two interest rates of interest. Here's the 30-year fixed mortgage rate in blue and the 50-year fixed mortgage rate in red. Now, if you look toward the right of the slide, you can see that during much of the pandemic, mortgage rates at record lows. You can also see the revenge of mortgage rates. In January, the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate was 3.22%. It is now screaming towards 7%. So obviously, the housing market has changed. Gone are the days of bidding wars over houses and so on and so forth, at least for now. Now, I'm an economist. I'm in the business of forecasting. I'm going to share with you my forecast later on. And you don't have to believe it, by the way. That's not what this is about. This is about me issue spotting on your behalf so that you can refine your own views of the economy and what that might mean for your enterprise or for the library or whatever you're involved with. But I have been surprised by, and I'll admit this, I have been surprised, I don't like being surprised, but I have been surprised by the extent to which home prices appreciated during this pandemic that has shrunk our labor force relative to what it would have been. This is your S&P Case-Shiller U.S. National Home Price Index, and you can see how profound the growth in home prices has been over the course of this public health crisis. And many people will say to you, this is a straight up bubble. This is 03, 04, 05 all over again. And for the most part, those people would be dead wrong. It's not 03, 04, and 05 at all. Remember back then what was going on? Well, among other things, flawed lending. That was your subprime mortgage, that was your no document loan. Look back at historical data and see how many Americans got a mortgage back then, got the coupon booklet that goes with the mortgage, never used the coupon booklet once, didn't make their first mortgage payment. That is not sustainable. And of course, builders collectively saw that demand for housing, artificially induced demand in many cases, and then tried to build to that demand. That house of cards had to crumble, and of course it does, and you can see toward the middle of the slide through the price action, it does crumble. But this is different. As far as I can tell, lending centers have been far more disciplined this time around. And if there's a disequilibrium in the housing market, it's not that we have too many homes for sale, of course, it's that we have far too few. This is vacant housing units for sale. Look how much we had back for sale back in 06, 07, 08, as the lending markets were shutting down, as people became more delinquent on their mortgages, or more people became delinquent. Now the issue is we don't have enough homes for sale, especially for young families. And I would say that's also true in Carroll County, but also Baltimore County, others. I'm not trying to pick on Carroll County. It's a national phenomenon. Now, one of the things I want to do for you as I move toward the tail end of this presentation is I'm going to show you a number of leading economic indicators because I want to pivot from a discussion of what's been going on to what's likely to happen during the year to come. So here's a leading indicator. This is U.S. residential building permits. As a leading indicator because if you're a builder, you've got to pull a permit before you build. Now, the segment I'll focus on first, sorry, this is months of it. There it is. The segment I'll focus on first is the red segment. That relates to single unit structures. Single unit structures. That's your townhomes and your single family homes. See how much we're building back in 03, 04, and 05 toward the left of the slide, as builders were trying to collectively meet that artificially elevated demand. Then we get Great Recession, global financial crisis, foreclosure crisis, and for many years we don't build many single family homes. But something is happening underneath the surface. In fact, it's happening on top of the surface. The Millennials, our most populous generation, are coming of age. Ask yourself, what is the most common age in America this year? 30. We have more 30-year-olds than any other age. What's the second most common age in America this year? 31. What's the third most common age in America this year? 29. 5 years ago, the most common age in America was 25. What do 25-year-olds do? Mostly weed. But they might rent an apartment, which lines up neatly with the apartment building boom that we started in the previous decade. Now they're of household formation age. We're going to have a ton of weddings this year. We've had a ton of weddings this year. Now, some of these young folks don't believe in marriage, so they're together, but they don't get married because they're not into that. I'm not sure why I'm using air quotes, but they're not into that, but they're together. And they don't necessarily have kids because they're not into that, but they have pets that they treat like children. So they're looking for something different, a new domicile. They can't find it. They can't afford it. Inventory is low. Prices are too high. And when mortgage rates are closing in on 7%, 30-year fixed, even more problematic. So what do they end up doing in many cases? They end up renting for lengthier periods, often in very nice apartments, often in newish construction. The blue segment here is multifamily construction. I expect that to remain quite strong, that segment, because higher mortgage rates are actually good for the apartment segment of the economy. And we're in for that for quite some time. Now, I skipped a slide here. This is the inventory of months of inventory by Maryland County in terms of homes. Carroll County, 0.8 months of inventory. Nowhere close to equilibrium. There's almost nothing for sale here, and certainly nothing that many young families could afford. Again, whether or not you view that as a problem or not, that's of course up to you. But one can make the argument that if you can't attract in the next generation of entrepreneurs and innovators and business owners, that ultimately will prove to be a challenge to the Carroll County economy. How does it retain its dynamism? And it has been dynamic. Do not get me wrong. I understand or appreciate all the industrial growth that's taken place. But the question becomes, a generation from now, what does it look like? Now, in some categories, there is too much space, too many units. I'll give you an example, the U.S. office market. This is your U.S. office vacancy rate. People keep asking me, Anirban, when will the workers come back to the office? I don't think they are. That's not where they want to be. Some people do. Some people, in fact, sitting at the table here in front where I've been, are a bit strange because they've said, yeah, I want to go back to the office. Well, you're weird because most Americans don't want to do that. Computer cat coffee, it's enough. Candy bar. So, and so the office, you don't see any sign of recovery here, do you? Now, the Wall Street banks are different. So you might have heard that in August, Manhattan had the fastest office space, at least they've seen during the pandemic, because the big financial giants, the investment banks, have the wherewithal, they have such good jobs that they offer, they can actually get people to do what they want, come back to the office. Okay, fine. But in much of the country, that is not the case. Here's another thing. In 2020, we suffered a lot of disruption in terms of the retail segment of the economy. So among the retailers that went bankrupt in 2020 were True Religion, Pure & Imports, Neiman Marcus, JCPenney, J. Crew, GNC, Brooks Brothers, Lord & Taylor, Guitar Center, Francesca's, many, many others. And no surprise, when you have so many retail bankruptcies, attendant with that are store closures. And so when you look at vacancy rate in American malls, elevated. In fact, it is said that 1 in 5 American malls will falter over the next several years. And then that creates a great opportunity for communities for adaptive reuse, by the way, mixed use, outpatient medical centers, fulfillment centers, data centers, whatever it happens to be. But, it does speak to a lack of momentum in shopping center construction, for instance. We're probably over-retailed in this country. This is hotel occupancy. The last 3 bars here are 2019, 2020, 2021. Admittedly, 2021 was a year of partial recovery for hotel occupancy, but nowhere close to where we had been. Now, leisure travel has come back with a vengeance. That's true. But business travel has not. And why is that? Because if you're in business, what are you? You're a profit maximizer. And to be a profit maximizer, you must be a cost minimizer. And one way to minimize costs, of course, is send fewer people to conferences. That's less airfare, less hotel rooms, so on and so forth, and that's exactly what we're observing. So it's those hotels that cater to the business traveler in the airport hotel district or in the central business district with lots of meeting space, that's where I see a lot of the suffering. At least in terms of the hotel segment. And so when you look at the gross domestic product data, this is non-residential fixed investment in structures. This is building construction in America. You see no sign of recovery there. So yes, lots of industrial construction. And this supply chain story is real. This reshoring story to America is real. More and more American CEOs are concluding we want to make it in America. Intel announcing $20 billion investment in Columbus, Ohio. Largest chip manufacturing plant in the world to be constructed there. The industrial Midwest. Normally that would have gone to South Korea or Taiwan, Japan, but no, it's industrial Midwest. Similar things, Micron Technology is announcing a big investment in New York State, so on and so forth. I would love to see more of that in Maryland, by the way. I'm tired of our state being passed up. Recently, Apple Computer was looking for a new sort of secondary headquarters. And so I talked to the economic development folk at the Department of Commerce, downtown Baltimore, and they said Maryland was not even on the list for Apple. Well, how can that be? We're so educated. We have Johns Hopkins and the Naval Academy and so on. I-95, we have all these, the Port of Baltimore. They chose Austin, Texas, because everyone chooses Austin, Texas. But the point is, we in Maryland just are not on the map when it comes to economic development. We didn't win HQ2, all these kinds of things Virginia did. It's frustrating, but nonetheless, don't get me wrong. This reshoring story, this industrial story is real. More and more manufacturing is coming to America. Our leading constraint, by the way, workforce. We have not trained the industrial workforce of the 21st century. We don't have enough machinists and mechanics, millwrights, so on and so forth. If we did that, including in Maryland, and you ask Maryland manufacturers like Cecil County, Carroll County, elsewhere, where do you get some of your best workers? They'll tell you, Delaware. Dell Tech, whatever it happens to be, it's frustrating. Lots of room for improvement here, as it turns out. But despite all that fulfillment center construction, industrial construction, because of the weakness in the office segment, hotel segment, and shopping center segment, you can see a lack of momentum there. Well, enough of that. I hope you've enjoyed this James Bond presentation, or James Bond theme presentation thus far. My name is Bond, Ani Bond. I want to show you, again, some additional leading economic indicators. Psychological indicator here. This is the University of Michigan's Index of Consumer Sentiment. So the notion here is if consumers feel good about the world, they're more likely to spend. How do American consumers feel? Miserable. The American people are angry and sad. And what's the number one factor that has them annoyed, has them so pessimistic? Inflation. Food prices, rent, so on and so forth. There are other factors, $30 trillion national debt, worried about midterm elections, Russia, Ukraine, all kinds of things. But it's inflation that's number one. And you can tell that Americans are miserable by the way they drive. They drive angry, and you saw that this morning, I think. But they're not the only ones that are pessimistic. This is from the National Federation of Independent Business. This is their index of small business optimism. Question, small business America, is it a good time to expand your business over the next 3 months? In August, only 5% said yes. This is almost exactly where we were back in 2008, just to give you some sense. Mind you, many of these small businesses would like to expand their enterprise. They see unmet demand to be fulfilled, but they can't find workers. They can't afford workers. Their workers are not that productive. They're not that loyal. They suffer equipment shortages. They suffer higher materials prices, whatever it happens to be. The concrete prices are up 14% over the past year in this country. So there's that. Now, sometimes these psychological indicators can be deeply misleading. For instance, we don't care so much about what consumers are thinking, feeling, or believing. We care much more about what they're doing. So they're telling the consumer sentiment or confidence surveyor, I am miserable as an American. Inflation, elections, all kinds of things, national debt. I just can't take it anymore. I'm really upset. But I can't talk any further about these issues with you because I'm going shopping. So this is U.S. manufacturers' new orders for consumer goods. Why is this a leading indicator? This is orders. So orders translate into production and then distribution. It's a leading indicator of activity. You see very little indication that the consumer is pulling back. How has the consumer dealt so far with all this inflation? They've spent right through it. Now look, I know who I'm talking to. Carroll County Chamber of Commerce. I get that. This is a premium audience. You people are 93 octane all the way. I understand that. I get that. So for much of this year, you've been filling up at more than $5 a gallon. And my guess is when you've been filling up at $5 a gallon at this gas station, you've been saying to yourself, when I leave this gas station, I best have the roads to myself. I'm paying for exclusivity. But the roads have not been exclusive to you. They've been actually very busy. In fact, isn't it amazing that we'd have traffic jams at 11 a.m. or at 2 p.m.? Why is that? If people are working remotely, why do we have so much traffic in the middle of the day? That should be investigated. But again, the point is, for the most part, consumers have spent right through this inflation, and you can see it in the data. There is actually some evidence that relates to the demand side, of course, the consumer spending, but there's been some supply side of the economy improvement. This is from the Philadelphia Federal Reserve. It's their Manufacturing Business Outlook survey, and the question on the table here is, over the next 6 months, what do you expect to happen with respect to delivery times? They expect them to fall. And in fact, it would appear that the worst of the supply chain issues in this country was suffered back around December of 2021. Yes, I know Russia and Ukraine, and there's some other issues. Natural gas is above $7 per million BTU this morning in America. So the high prices are still here. But there's some evidence of supply chain normalization, some evidence. So you put strong demand from the consumer together with some supply chain improvement, that augurs a fairly decent economy, doesn't it, in the near term? In fact, if you look at the Conference Board's U.S. Index of Leading Economic Indicators, recent readings have been falling. So this is a composite of 10 leading indicators in their own right, all bundled into one index that I've graphed for you here. Readings are still high, which is one of the reasons you hear many economists tell you, I don't think recession is coming. I think the Federal Reserve can engineer a soft landing. They can slow the economy, weed excess inflation out of the economy without driving us into a recession. Which brings me to my final substantive slide. If you're an economist, you only forecast twice. So I forecast at the beginning of the year, and that's the forecast I'm sharing with you now, and then I'll forecast at the end of the year, and my forecast will become whatever actually transpired. And in that way, it always proves to be correct. It's really quite ingenious. I think this will be a year of growth, and I understand GDP was negative during the first half of the year. You understand that. But you look at retail sales, summer travel, job growth, and so on and so forth, wage growth, none of those are indicia of recession. I think recession is coming, though, next year, and it will not be a mild one. And what is my principal consideration here? The Federal Reserve Bank of the United States, trying to engineer this soft landing. And again, they do that largely by influencing interest rates, and in this case, of course, by turning them higher. We have had since the early 1980s we've had 8 previous rate tightening cycles. 6 have ended in recession. Even the New York Jets have a better record than that. I don't think they can do it. And I think part of this is because I have no faith in these people. I have no faith in Jerome Powell as a Federal Reserve Chairman. He got us into this jackpot in the first place where we have to root for bad economic news. And so I don't think they have the degrees of freedom to engineer that soft landing. Moreover, on top of that, the economy will remain unbalanced with supply starting to keep up with demand. I know I just talked about the fact the supply chain is improving. It is still the case in this inflation environment, the supply is having a tough time keeping up with demand. And Russia and Ukraine and Omicron in China and so on and so forth, it doesn't help that situation. So along with rising wages amidst the Great Resignation, this unbalanced economy translates into higher than average economy-wide inflation, not just in 2022, but next year as well. And there'll be lots to talk about stagflation, I suspect, next year. What is stagflation? A combination of stagnation, slow economic growth, and inflation. Now, inflation, we may have achieved peak inflation. Inflation might be lower next year than this year, but nowhere close to 2%. That's my point. And the Federal Reserve, therefore, will have to keep the brakes on. And we have not really experienced, to this point, the real effect of the interest rate increases they have already produced, because there's a lag effect here. And there are more interest rate increases to come. And ultimately, I think that adds up into a fairly significant recession. First half of next year, I think, is particularly worrisome. And then finally, yes, I'm an economist, so I'm forecasting interest rates to increase. You ask an economist anywhere, movie theater, dry cleaner, ballpark, arena, are interest rates going to increase? And we will say yes. And we've been doing that for 40 years. And for the most part, we've been wrong. Interest rates have fallen for the past 40 years. Doesn't matter because no one holds us accountable. And I say that to the folks at the Gerstel Academy, the young folks, become an economist because no one holds us accountable, and it's a fabulous way to live. Now, if you're interested in these kinds of data, we'll turn to Q&A in a moment. I actually have a newsletter this year, started in January, at basu.substack.com. We try to bring a lot of humor to the newsletter, along with, of course, economic data, the latest and greatest economic data. And if you're not interested, please, please, please feel free to pound sand. And with that, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been a privilege to be with you. Yeah. Okay, there is a microphone for anyone with questions, a roving microphone probably. So are there any questions here?
Good morning. Is this on? Amazing presentation. Thank you so much for the uplift, because a lot of us are feeling that down on the screen in the slide. But you mentioned Russia and Ukraine multiple times, and just curious, you've never mentioned the border and anything that's going on in the border and an impact on American economy. So I was wondering about your thoughts on that.
Right. So question is about the border, and obviously we've had lots of intrusion across the border, the southern border of the United States. It's hard to keep up with the hundreds of thousands of contacts that our personnel, our governmental personnel that are meant to protect the border have, every month with people coming in across the border. I don't know who could be happy about this. It is a crisis. It is a problem. And I think the biggest issue is this, from my perspective. I'm thinking macroeconomically, yes. There are fiscal issues. There are issues of public safety, and all. People can talk about all kinds of things. But I think that here's the big issue for me as an economist, is that I think that undocumented migration, and you're not supposed to say illegal aliens anymore, right? So I used the word addict recently to talk about a group of people I just recently interviewed for a project. And I was told, you cannot use that word. It's called substance use disorders now. So you can't actually ever say what you want to say anymore. You're not allowed to say it. So I'm not going to say, I'm going to say undocumented migrants, okay? So my fear is that because there's so much undocumented migration into the country, that it's interfering with our legal immigration policy. Because I think that's where we can make a lot of magic as a country. Because as a free society able to accommodate people from all over the world, we can cherry pick the best and the brightest people, whether software engineers from India or physicists from South Korea or whomever it happens to be, Bolivian botanists. Many of us watch the NFL draft every year. Of course, we love the NFL and so on and so forth. And I've said that there should be an immigrant draft. And here's what I mean by that. And it should be on ESPN, as it turns out. So I could imagine a situation in which, it would say Maryland selects Sung Kim, aerospace engineer of Seoul, South Korea, with its #1 pick. And then Mel Kiper would get on and say, this guy's 5'5" tall, he's 118 pounds, he runs a 7-second 40, he benches at 48.5 pounds on a good day, but 800 on his SAT, Stanford PhD, 15 global patents, Massachusetts on the clock. But my fear is that we are not allowing ourselves to import more of that talent because we're worried about all this migration of the southern border, saying that's enough immigration. And so macroeconomically, it makes us weaker, not just from a public safety or fiscal perspective, right? You can see the spectacle of people being sent to Martha's Vineyard in Washington, D.C. and Chicago. And set that aside. The issue is that we have a talent shortfall in this country. And as more and more baby boomers retire, that talent shortfall actually expands. So you've got to replenish that. And one way to do that is through legal immigration. You can't give birth to a 30-year-old, but actually you can. That's what immigration is. You gave birth to a 30-year-old with a PhD in aerospace engineering, and somebody else paid for their education. And you free rode on that. But we don't allow ourselves to cherry pick like that because we've got this conflated legal and illegal immigration or undocumented policymaking. So it is a crisis. It's a problem. I think there are people from both parties actually who are focused on this. You talk to Democrats in Texas, they're very much focused on this as a crisis, right? And so what can I tell you? I didn't talk much about it because I don't think it really changes economic life up here in Carroll County too much, but it's a problem, and it's a problem for our future. And so we need to solve this. We need to defend that border so that we can have rational immigration policy. Any other questions here? There's a question up front here. You got it. Oh, yeah. Smattering of applause. Thank you. I won 3 votes. 3 votes out of 200. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for being here this morning. One of the things that I think has been in the news a lot is the proposed student debt relief, and I was just wondering your thoughts on if that would contribute to any of the inflationary factors you discussed here this morning.
Yes, another thing I did not talk about this, forgiveness of student debt. Now, one of the things I attempt to do, in front of any audience is I want you not to be able to figure out my political affiliation. So after this presentation, I don't want you to be able to know with certainty if I'm a Democrat, Republican, Labor, Likud, Bharatiya Janata Party, German Social Democrat, Australian People's Party. I don't want you to know. There's a lot of economists get up and you could tell immediately, oh, they're Republican, right? Or they're Democrat. I don't want you to be able to tell. I want to focus on the data. But here's my view on student debt. I think this is awful policymaking. Not just because it adds somewhere in the range of $330 billion to $500 billion to the national debt. But I think the biggest objection I have to it is this, that it makes people who did it right look like suckers, right? That you create some perverse incentives, that I paid down my debt. Look, I signed a contract saying I was going to borrow this money for this purpose. I said I was going to pay it back. And now those people who did it right paid it back. So people are asking them, what you paid back for? You're an idiot. You should have just waited. They forgave it for a lot of people. 20,000 for people, Pell Grants, 10,000 for everybody else. I think that's awful policymaking. Now, did it before the midterm? I understand why it was done politically. I get that. I think it's lousy policymaking. There are undoubtedly certain situations in which debt should have been forgiven. Some of the issues at some of the for-profit colleges where people borrowed money but didn't get what they bargained for, those kinds of things, I understand that. But across the board, and by the way, a large beneficiary of this was upper middle class households. Right? Who sends their kids to college often? So from the perspective of distributional equity, also, this does not make sense to me. Is it inflationary? Oh, you betcha. Now, people say, well, why would you say it's inflationary? Because, during the pandemic, people were not paying their student debts to begin with. Now they're not going to pay them now because, at least to a certain extent, they've been forgiven, if not completely. So what difference does it make? Here's the difference. It makes people feel wealthier. You just forgive $10,000 or $20,000 of my debt. I feel wealthier. Guess what I'm going to do now? I'm going to spend money. That's inflationary. So I think that there are some policymakers in Washington, D.C. who say we're fighting inflation, we're trying to bring inflation down, but they're doing exactly the opposite on occasion. And student debt is an example of that. So that's my view. I still don't think you know what my political affiliation is, I hope. But anyway, I hope that answers your question. Yeah. There's a gentleman up here with a question, but let's go to this person first and then come up here. Okay.
Good morning. Thanks for being here. I'm Mish from the city of Tawnytown. In the United Kingdom, we recently saw the central bank step in to fix an error by the fiscal policymakers. Is there a role that you think that the fiscal policymakers here could play in fixing overreach by the central bank?
Right, so the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is a person named Liz Truss, and I have to say that based on what I've seen of her judgment, she would also gone on fourth down against the Buffalo Bills. Very poor judgment. And so she just, they're dealing with significant inflation. In fact, inflation just hit double digits in the Eurozone, as it turns out. It's also very high in the United Kingdom. And so she just announced a very significant tax cut package, which of course crushed the bond markets there, caused the currency to dive. The pound was down to $1.07 versus the US dollar for a time. It's up to $1.13 this morning. But so the monetary policymakers there are trying to slow the economy, curtail inflation, bringing inflation expectations down. Liz Truss is trying to do something the exact opposite. Now, she's had to reverse that decision, as it turns out, under public pressure from her own party. But there is a misalignment, and this is what gets to your question. There's a misalignment between fiscal policy in some of these countries and monetary policy. And you want those policies aligned. Now, in America, getting back to the student debt situation, but just overall federal spending is still inflationary. Right? The federal government is still spending a lot of money, pouring a lot of money into the economy. The monetary policymakers are trying to slow the economy down, but they're working at cross purposes. And so if we could get better alignment, I think it would cause us to feel pain for a shorter period of time. We're going to feel some pain here. We got ourselves in a situation, we didn't, the Federal Reserve did, but we're in this situation, we're going to feel some pain, but we'd like to truncate that period of suffering. But until fiscal policy aligns with monetary policy in this country, the suffering is going to be that much greater, that much more durable. And I hope that answers your question, but that's one of the things that the federal government could do. Dial down its spending a bit right now, allow monetary policy making to take over, inflation to subside, so that we can get back to to growth in a low inflation environment. There's a question right here, this gentleman.
Well, I think you've probably pretty well answered the last two questions, what I was going to ask. My question was, many of us are looking to the midterm elections to be the answer to some of these problems you've discussed today. What do you think about that?
Oh, gosh, what an awful question. So the question is about the midterm elections. And I tell you, a few months ago, I thought I understood, and I actually build election outcomes into my forecast, because election outcomes will determine federal spending, and federal spending, of course, is part of gross domestic product, and gross domestic product influences things like employment and unemployment and interest rates and inflation, so on and so forth. So you have to factor that into your model. And I thought a few months ago I had it. I thought it was pretty clear. The president's approval rating was below 50%, actually for a time below 40%. Based on history, the Republicans would storm into Congress, maybe take back the Senate, but undoubtedly take the House. And now, given some Supreme Court decisions, given that the president's approval rating actually has been sliding a bit higher recently, given that there's candidates like Herschel Walker in Georgia, who is hardly coherent, great running back, but not very sound on policy. I think that it's going to be a closer election as a result. I still think that the Republicans will take the House, that we'll have a new Speaker of the House, and that therefore, built in my forecast, the notion is that we'll have significant gridlock for the last 2 years of the Biden administration, and therefore federal spending growth will be less than it has been. That is what's built into my forecast. But I know I could be dead wrong. Predicting political outcomes makes fools of us all, right? I mean, who saw that 2016 presidential election? Not many. Some people said, yeah, but not many of us. So anyway, that's my answer to your question. That's what I've sort of factored in. It's messy out there, but I still think you'll see some Republican gains out there, and that'll slow down the Biden administration's role right now, which I'm not saying is a good thing or bad thing. That's for you to decide. But that's what I built into my forecast. Any other questions here? Yes, there's a question over that table.
Good morning. I'm wondering about the green economy and the need to take a look at the climate of the world in relation to the economy and how we could possibly spend our way into a green economy if we're not supposed to be spending.
Right. The question is about the transition, which has proven a bit awkward, to a green economy, the transition from fossil fuels to wind and solar and so on and so forth, even nuclear to a certain extent, a big nuclear project right now in Georgia, for instance. It's an awkward transition. I think it's one that has to be made. I wish that the world would cooperate with us, right? I wish the Brazilians were not ruining their rainforest, as an example, right? I wish other countries were moving more quickly. And by the way, the leading state in terms of investing in renewable energy is Texas, as it turns out, oddly enough, which is also our leading producer of oil and natural gas. But look, I am all for the green economy. I did a study recently about offshore wind. Many studies I've done on the economics of offshore wind, big advocate of bringing more offshore wind capacity to Maryland, as it turns out, which has put me into conflict with a lot of people from Ocean City. But I believe that we have to make the transition. And by the way, I think the transition is going to be made. And whether people like Gavin Newsom in California and saying that we're not going to sell gasoline-powered cars after the year 2035, people think maybe it's awful policy or good policy, whatever it happens to be. Ultimately, that's where we're headed. We're headed to a cleaner, greener economy, and I'd like to get there first. Who has the leadership right now in solar, wind, turbine manufacturing, that kind of thing? China. Who's the leader in terms of battery technology in the world? China. I want us to be number one. I think ultimately we will be number one, but we shouldn't stand in the way of that. And I know that in Carroll County we have this massive solar array on a particular roof, and people are very proud about that here. So I think a lot of support for this. Now, how do you make that transition from natural gas and oil to alternative energies, given our technical limitations, the limitations of the electrical grid, so on, that kind of thing, the fact that it's not always sunny, it's not always windy. I don't know, technicians would know better than me, but somewhere out there is an optimal path for us to make that transition and to dominate global energy and therefore to make this century our own once again. That's my answer to your question. And I don't think it's really an inflation issue, because what we're seeing is, as much of an inflation issue, is that the cost of producing electricity using solar and wind has slid significantly over the last few years. Technology is progressing. So again, there's an optimal pathway there. We can't abandon natural gas now. I don't think that's the case. We need more pipelines now, as it turns out, whether Keystone or otherwise. But at some point, we're going to make that transition. The next 20 years is going to look very different. But I want us to be the leaders, not the Chinese. So hopefully that answers your question. And you can tell now that I'm not a Chinese Communist Party member. That much you can tell. That much you can tell, and I'm not. Are there any other questions here from this audience? So about 10 minutes, or 5 minutes. We have about 5 minutes. Any questions here?
Hello. With regard to the future of next year and the first half of the year, you talked about the fact that we might be moving toward a recession. What impact do you think that will have on jobs and unemployment at that point in time?
Right, so unemployment is going to rise. So the question is about jobs and unemployment. I mean, that's exactly what the Federal Reserve is trying to engineer. They want to deconstruct this very strong labor market in which there are too many employers chasing too few employees. They want to bend that the other way. So I would think that, right now unemployment nationally is around 3.7%. I would think that at the worst of it, at some point next year, maybe early 2024, because unemployment is a lagging indicator, that you're looking at something a bit north of 5%, which doesn't sound so bad, but when you're in the mid threes, that actually is quite a departure. And so that's where I expect it to be, which means that you're not going to have a particularly mild recession. You have to have something fairly severe, significant, to get to that level of unemployment. But that's the answer to your question, I think, just numerically. Any other questions here from this audience? Any other? Yes, there's a gentleman way over here. Yeah, exactly. Other sideline.
Yeah, you spoke slightly about productivity being down. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit as to why?
Yeah, so productivity typically is measured as output per hour worked. And early during the pandemic, as people went remote in very large numbers, productivity actually surged in America. And one of the reasons for that is because at that point, many Americans were worried about their job security. They wanted to hold on to their jobs, and they wanted to prove to their employers, I can be productive, I can be responsible. Now, of course, we're in a situation in which, look, if I lose my job today, I got 15 chasing me. I got no problem here. So I don't have to, there's a term called quiet quitting. You've heard this term? Quiet quitting occurs when an employee continues to work. They show up to work or wherever they are, and they're doing their work, but they do just enough to keep their employment. No more than that. Now, that might sound pretty foreign to many people in this audience who go above and beyond, right? Answering texts at midnight and so on and so forth, and emails on the weekend, all this stuff. But there's this thing called quiet quitting. Now you might say, well, this is pretty rare, right? This can't be that common. A recent poll by Gallup was conducted in June, finding that about 50% of American workers qualify as quiet quitters, about 50%. And this is particularly true among younger workers. So all of a sudden, that desperation to prove your productivity has fallen, and productivity, therefore, is no longer what it used to be. And I think what's happened is that the world of remote work is catching up to us. That all of a sudden, we're finding that, yes, in the short term, productivity can grow with remote work, but in the longer term, you need more engagement. You need more supervision. You need more collaboration between people in an enterprise. And so that's where we are right now. So what that means is that employers are paying more for less. And that's part of the inflationary situation in which we find ourselves. I hope that answers the question. Any questions here? Any questions? We might have time for one more. One more, yes, he says one more. And there is one more. There it is.
Just wanted to know what your opinion is on the public programs that were developed in response to COVID regarding maybe the emergency rental assistance program and the millions of dollars coming through to folks to help them remain housed, and then also the impact that may have had on people re-entering the workforce.
Right. So obviously we had massive stimulus. So and across administrations, by the way. So the first was signed by Donald Trump on March 27th of 2020. That was the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief and Economic Security Act. That was a $2.2 trillion package. That was the first package to offer direct payments to Americans, direct payments to households, but also included many forms of assistance. And also around that time, we see various moratoria on rent increases and rent payments and student debt payments, so on and so forth. That administration signed another stimulus package on April 24th of 2020. It was about $500 billion. That included more money for paycheck protection, which also came out of that CARES Act package. So business also got money too. So lots of money flowing into the economy during that period. On December 27th of 2020, Donald Trump signs the Consolidated Appropriations Act. That's a $906 billion package. Then just 3 months later, March 11th, March 11th of 2021, Joe Biden signs the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. That's a $1.9 trillion package. So and that was actually more payments to households, as it turns out. And so I think one of the reasons we've had this lack of labor force participation is because a lot of Americans have been able to pay some bills without going to work, or maybe working part-time instead of full-time. But now that money has been spent in many cases, U.S. savings rate is falling. Many Americans are taking on more credit card debt in this inflation environment, which is what I thought would induce more people to join the labor force than has occurred, but I think it's still going to happen. And he's standing now, so I got to wrap this up. And now he's walking aggressively. So, but anyway, I think that's one of the things that has weakened the impulse to come back to the labor market. But now a lot of this is being deconstructed, child tax credits and so on and so forth. And so now, given an elevated inflation environment and the lack of this, programmatic support, it's going to induce more people back into the labor force. That's what I expect, and I think to a certain extent that's positive. I love the fact that childhood poverty fell so dramatically in 2021. That's a wonderful thing, but it has to be fiscally sustainable, and it probably was not. So thank you for the question. And with that, I give way. Thank you very much.
Anirban, thank you so much, Anirban. It's great to have you here, and it just has been a very excellent event. So how about another round of applause for Anirban? I first saw you speak like 18 years ago when I worked for Pulte Homes. You were talking to us at Ram's Head over a lot of beers in Annapolis, and you have never been bad. You've always been good. Even when the news is bad, you've been great, so thank you. I also want to thank all of our sponsors. Events like this do not happen without sponsors. For those that don't know, who are not a member of the Chamber, and a lot of you who are may not even know, we're not part of the government. We're not part of some like U.S. Chamber, Maryland Chamber that gets funding from all different places. We're an independent nonprofit that gets funding exclusively from our members to do events like this and our Educator Award, where we honor folks here in Carroll, and our Drug Awareness Expo that we do, and our Carroll Biz Challenge, and all these great events that we do because of people like you. So if you are a member, thank you. If you're not a member, this is a great time to join. You pay for next year, you get the rest of this year for free. We do appreciate your support. And I do want to thank our sponsors here, specifically the actual library. This is the third year in a row they've sponsored Audubon. Audubon spoke the last 2 years via Zoom. So we had like 300 on each of those calls, which was great, but it's even better to have you here live. So, and I want to thank our friends from CMC. You know, this will be hopefully up and running soon. And also, it wasn't mentioned, but Steve Lowe from 127 Creative helped to set up a lot of the screens here and all that. How about a round of applause for Steve as well? Thank you to the members of the board, and especially the people who've agreed to serve three years. So we'll try to make it as painless on you as we can. And a special thanks and round of applause to Val, our chair. You did a great job, Val. Thank you so much. I want to thank Becky Seek. She's back here somewhere. Becky, where are you? Stand up for those that don't know Becky. Oh, she's out in the hallway. She didn't want to hear me talk. Okay, there's Becky. Dana Blum's been working with us. She's in here somewhere too. She helped assign you guys in. I want to thank her. Other than that, you've got a little card at your table with our upcoming events. Leisure travel, you said, is something that's going to come back. For those that know, we like to do trips through the chamber. And I can tell you what you said is true. We just advertised a trip to Egypt in November of next year, and we got 13 people who put in reservations in the first 2 days. So that's been unusual. Some of the trips we've been kind of holding back, but apparently people want to go and experience that. Where are our people from Gerstel? Where are the students? Could you guys stand up and get some applause? Great to have you guys here. Thank you so much. And somewhere in the room, we've got 4 students from Carroll Community College. Could you guys stand up and be recognized as well? We love having students. I think over on this side, at least that's where I saw you guys. All right. Other than that, I don't think I'm missing any announcements except to say, shop local. Obviously, you shouldn't spend too much money, right? But if you're going to spend, try to spend local. Look for members of the chamber. Go to our website, carrollcountychamber.org. They're all listed. Amazon is a must at times, but when you can avoid it, take a little extra time and spend your money local. I think that's it. Thank you so much for being here, okay?